So it'd be much more tempting to do the easy ones, which would be, say, trying to protect the beach. Therefore, we could end up over the years winning battles but losing the wars. In other words, small gains could be achieved, but overall the global situation becomes worse, such as the concern over the depletion of non-renewable resources, particularly with the development of China and India. So yes, we can make small gains. We can certainly do a lot to protect, say, the Australian coastline. But on the other hand, you've got India and China developing rapidly. And as Tim said this morning, we just don't have enough resources for that continued high rate of development. So I think one is that we will be sidetracked to look at symptoms. A second one is what I call moving into the green trap. We hear a lot from the climate change deniers about green hoax. My colleague on Radio 2GB on a Monday night, Brian Wilshire, for example, refers to green hoax all the time, because he says, look, there is no greenhouse issue. It's all a green hoax. You guys who want to introduce world government, control over people. There was a question this morning from the guy who was concerned about what was going on with Lake Macquarie and control over private behaviour, etc. What happens if it's a green trap? What happens, in fact, if we've got it wrong, in the sense that the situation is even more desperate than it actually seems at the moment? So we have the experts like Dr. Pearman who have come up with their own projections. But what happens if it actually is worse than people are predicting? See, our problem is that the ordinary person in this area would look at the local environment and just say, oh, things have improved greatly. The first time I was in this area was 1973, 36 years ago. Now you come back in the environment, just catching the train this morning, I was impressed with all the nice buildings that are going up around Lidcombe, etc. You know, the ordinary person would say, well, it doesn't seem as if the environment's under any great threat. The air is cleaner, the streets are better organised, it's safer than it is to be around here. In other words, all this talk of environmental doom doesn't make much sense to me, because my own experience suggests here in Sydney that life is actually better than before. So we get lulled into this green trap. But at the same time, we've got, for example, issues of China and India. And so the actual bottom line could be even worse than we thought. You know, I'm intrigued by the way in which, if you look at the purchase of cars in China, 80% of the cars purchased in China are being bought by people who have never before owned a car. In America, it's only 10%. In other words, it's a saturated market. In China, it's a new market. Virtually everybody who buys a car is buying one for the first time. 1.4 potential purchasers of cars. Why? Because there's no old age pension. A husband and wife, because of a one-child policy, have only got one child. No old age pension. So they buy a good car so that their son will marry a good woman, because that woman will be your daughter-in-law who will look after you in old age. Therefore, as soon as you've got money, you buy a car for your son, because that'll be your old age pension when the woman comes into the family. How are we going to cope with so many people driving cars in China? So in other words, therefore, a second risk is that the experts, like Dr. Pearman, might actually have got the climate change speculation wrong, and that the situation could be far worse than anybody has suggested. Which takes me into my third risk, which is capitalising on all this end-of-the-world movie stuff. The latest one, as you know, suggests that we finish up here now in the year 2012, because what we're seeing, therefore, is this rise of fatalism. Hollywood sees this money to be made out of doom and gloom. Declining environmental standards will increase the number of environmental refugees, which is the question that was posed a few minutes ago. There will be the additional mass movements of people. Mass movements of people may trigger additional ethnic conflicts as people move onto the lands of others. Meanwhile, back here in Australia, there will be anger among some of the general public who will feel that they were not warned about the changes. They will feel betrayed by the politicians. So there'll be a growing sense of despair. We're all ruined. There's nothing we can do. So that also adds to being paralysed by fear. So I think there are three risks at least to be borne in mind. One is that politicians will be tempted to go for the ones that offer quick solutions, such as protecting against beach erosion. Secondly, that in fact the situation could actually be far worse than the experts are predicting. And thirdly, we will be paralysed ultimately by fear, because we just feel that we're all ruined and there's nothing we can do. Let me just conclude with looking at some of the opportunities. Let me try to be optimistic now. One opportunity is simply that which is given by the Club of Rome with its phrase, the century of the environment. The Club of Rome has argued, the Club of Rome, by the way, is the one that triggered the environment debate. In 1972, we published a report called The Limits to Growth. It's the largest selling report on the environment in world history. 29 million copies in 18 languages. So we triggered the environment debate in January 1972. We've argued that the 20th century will be known as the century of economics. It was in the 20th century that we worked out what works for economic growth. Even we now see that in China, the market system. As Deng Xiaoping has said, to be rich is glorious. So we know how to get economic growth. The 21st century will be called the century of the environment, because by that time the environmental problems during this century will force themselves upon us. My own feeling is that we should go for a no-regrets approach. In other words, whether or not there is an issue over climate change. As I said, I'm not a scientist. I have great difficulty following all those scientists. But it seems to me there is value in what the Minister had to say this morning about having shorter showers anyway. There is value in turning off the lights. There's value in turning off the air conditioning. If it's just going to simply cut back on your own home bills. That's what we mean by a no-regrets policy. You won't have any regrets if you start protecting the environment. Forget the climate change. Just do it to save money for yourself. Look at ways, therefore, in which you can refuse to use certain things, or reduce the use of things, or recycle in the use of things. For me, James, our MC, was trying to come up with a definition of sustainability. One that I like is sustainability is something I can do to take care of me and my family now, so that I don't make bad decisions that I'll have to deal with in the future. That seems to me a good example of a no-regrets policy. It'll help you to live more cheaply. A second opportunity is the value of crises as a turning point for change. You could do things in crises that you can't do during ordinary times. The Prime Minister, Kevin Rudd, keeps talking about the global financial crisis, the worst crisis since the Great Depression of the 1930s. It's interesting to note that the Great Depression